think you touched on something important when you made the analogy with Harry Potter and the gold bars, which is the exiting of the gold standard in the late 1970s. So I wonder if you might talk about that, because the creation of credit by banks has always been the norm throughout history, but the extent to which that has happened since the exiting of the gold standard, I think has an important role there. So I wonder if you might comment on that and sort of describe what has happened since then, particularly as it pertains to banks and their role in money creation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are there are different kinds of credit creating private actors over history, and the modern bank, I think, has a particular provenance, particular origins in maybe goldsmiths of England originally, and going from transferring individual gold coins that were corresponding to a certain person, like your commemorative coin given by your grandmother, just to a general debt. They've got a chest of coins and you owe a claim against them. And that's a kind of different legal history. One is the legal history of bailment, like if you give your coat to a dry cleaner, they don't own your coat, versus you give your coins to the bank, you have a claim on them in general, but they own those coins. It's a different legal concept. But then you kind of get the rise of the modern corporation that the states charter entities to serve public functions. In the early days, it would have been, Harvard College or the British East India Company or the Panama Canal Company, for specific purposes that the state doesn't feel like it has the resources to manage. And banks were a very important part of that, particularly at the state level in the United States. But a lot of that at that time is still grounded in international monetary regime, where whatever you're doing domestically still is part of a larger international system, or maybe built on monetary technologies that are common across regimes. And for a long time in history, gold was or silver were important sort of underlying resources out of which money was made. Now, you can go back to ancient Mesopotamia and you'll find examples of pure accounting-based monies. You'll find tokens out of clay. You'll find in Britain in the medieval period tally sticks made out of wood, where they break a piece of wood in half and they put a little notch on either side so you can correspond the issuer's part with the one out in circulation. It's almost like a public-private key encryption pair today. So it wasn't always gold-based. There was always credit as well, but there was this layer where you would often settle, usually with external actors outside of your social unit, with gold. It's sort of like those signs you probably might have seen in, my grandparents' home. It said, like, friends come with love, everyone else bring cat money, or something like that. I forget what cash, it is. Yeah, bring cash, right? We that idea of kind of like, if you're inside our social system, we can use our internal money. Outside, we have to use external monies. And gold was often one way between regimes, in part because you had that added collateral, right? The new Roman Empire comes in, the first thing he does is stamp his face on the coin or something like that. This starts to, I think, really gun under strain in the 19th century, but then FDR in the US context suspends domestic convertibility in the 30s. And so for all intents and purposes, the United States is off the domestic gold standard by World War II, and probably wouldn't have won World War II if it hadn't. But the international regime after that is still based on at least the fiction that the United States dollar will be always convertible on demand into gold. And the way that was structured was every other country converts into US dollars, US dollar converts into gold. And in theory, that's a gold standard, but in practice, it was a US dollar standard. And the minute the French really started getting annoyed about that and asking to see where the gold was, the United States said, actually, no, we're going to change our mind on that, and abandon the international convertibility in the early 70s. And ironically, it was Paul Volcker, amongst others, at the Treasury at the time who led that transition. But I would say really the biggest shift probably came in the 30s, and then maybe even before that with the 1860s and the rise of the greenback and the paper money movement, where there were legal debates basically saying that the state's power to issue money includes paper money as well as gold. And by the time the international dollar regime does break that convertibility, in practice, it was already long gone, and the US dollar was sort of central. But I think in some respects, it's an interesting moment because you're sort of not dematerializing, because money is obviously still very material, and I spend a lot of my time on monetary technology and fintech. It's obviously material, but you're detethering the public money from any real life reference point. And even if that reference point was one that you could change and bid up and bid down, and there were very important legal debates going back to the 16th century saying if the sovereign gives you a contract in pounds and then they change the gold value of the pound, they still only have to pay you how many pounds they said. They don't owe you the real value. They owe you the nominal value. So that nominalism principle, I think, was in there for a long time already. But to me, it reminds me a little bit of this funny story, at least funny to me, which is the international society that measures standards. So, like, what is a kilogram? What is a meter? What is a lumen? What is a unit of the other things that we measure in science? They're all pretty much defined in relation to each other. 1 kilogram is X of this, blah, blah, blah. But for a long period of time, the kilogram was the only one that was still in reference to a real thing in the world. Before, a foot was King George's foot, and then a meter was the circumference of the earth, etc. Now they have more scientific definitions. But for a long time, a kilogram referred to a big ball of platinum rhodium alloy that was underground in Paris. And it was a very heavy material, but they found that even that was a very stable alloy, was still leaking microns every year. The kilogram was getting lighter. A kilogram is a kilogram, except when it's not, kind of thing. And eventually they got rid of that, and they said, we're going to just use a certain number of quadrillion atoms of whatever element, and that amount of atoms will be a kilogram. Not quadrillion, but billions or trillions. And so in a sense, all of our systems of measurement now are all devoid from any reference in the real world. We define them in relation purely to each other.